They called her worthless, a burden her father couldn't unload. Tonight, in a hall full of the most powerful wolves in the Northern Territories, Aria Vale stood in the corner where failures belonged, until the Alpha King himself crossed the room and said her name. One look, one choice. And suddenly, the girl no one wanted became the woman everyone feared. But this isn't a fairy tale. This is survival. And survival has teeth. If you want to see how a forgotten girl becomes a queen who changes everything, stay until the end. Like this video and drop a comment telling me what city you're watching from. Let's get started. The Northern Hall smelled like snow, smoke, and ambition. Aria Vale had been standing in the same spot for 2 hours, pressed against a stone pillar near the back of the gathering hall, trying to make herself smaller. It wasn't hard. She'd had practice. Around her, the mating gathering roared with life. Wolves from every major pack in the Northern Territories filled the space. Alphas in tailored coats, betas with sharp eyes and sharper tongues, women draped in silk and confidence. The air hummed with power plays and politics. Every conversation a negotiation, every glance a calculation. Aria didn't belong here. She knew it. Her father knew it. And judging by the way people's eyes slid past her like she was part of the architecture, everyone else knew it too. "Stand straighter," her father hissed from beside her, his voice low and tight. Marcus Vale was a compact man with graying hair and a perpetual look of disappointment etched into his face. Tonight, that disappointment was aimed squarely at her. "You look like you're trying to disappear." "I am," Aria muttered, his hand clamped down on her wrist. Not hard enough to bruise, but firm enough to remind her who held the leash. "We need this, Aria. Our pack is dying. If you don't secure an alliance tonight—" "I know." She'd heard this speech a dozen times since they'd left the borderlands. Their pack was small, poor, and fading. The winters were getting harsher. The game was scarce. Neighboring territories were circling like vultures. Her father needed her to marry someone important, someone strong, someone who could prop up their crumbling borders with money and muscle. The problem was, no one important wanted her. She wasn't beautiful in the way that mattered here. Her hair was dark and plain, pulled into a simple braid. Her dress was clean but outdated, borrowed from a cousin who'd outgrown it 3 seasons ago. She had no dowry, no notable bloodline, no particular skill that would make a powerful wolf look twice. She was, in every measurable way, forgettable. "There," Marcus's grip tightened. "The Thornridge Beta. Third son, but he has influence. Smile at him." Aria looked across the room to where a broad-shouldered man with a cruel mouth was laughing too loudly at someone's joke. He'd already turned her down once, at the start of the evening, with a dismissive flick of his hand like she was a servant offering stale bread. "He's not interested," she said quietly. "Make him interested." "How?" Her father's jaw worked. He didn't have an answer. Neither did she. So she stood there, invisible, while the night ground on. It was easier, she'd learned, to watch than to participate. From her place against the pillar, she could see everything. The alliances forming over glasses of wine, the whispered arguments between rivals, the careful dance of wolves sizing each other up, deciding who was worth their time. The women here moved like they owned the air they breathed. Silk dresses that cost more than Aria's pack made in a season. Jewelry that caught the firelight and threw it back in sharp, expensive glints. They laughed at the right moments, touched arms with calculated casualness, and never, ever looked uncertain. Aria had tried earlier in the evening. She'd approached a group of women near the refreshment table, thinking maybe she could find some common ground, some thread of conversation that didn't revolve around bloodlines and territory disputes. They'd looked at her like she was a stray dog that had wandered in from the cold. "Oh," one of them had said, her voice dripping with false sweetness. "Are you lost, dear? The servant's entrance is around back." The others had laughed. Not cruelly, exactly, just casually, like she wasn't worth the energy of genuine cruelty. Aria had walked away with her cheeks burning and her father's disapproving glare drilling into her back. That had been an hour ago. Since then, she'd perfected the art of being furniture. "You're making us look weak," Marcus said now, his voice barely audible over the noise. "Standing here like some frightened child." "I'm not frightened," Aria said. It was a lie, but she said it anyway. "Then act like it. The Greystone Alpha's son is over by the— He's already rejected me. This afternoon, before the gathering even started." Her father went quiet. She could feel the weight of his frustration pressing down on her shoulders like a physical thing. "Then find someone who hasn't," he said finally. "Anyone. I don't care if he's a third son from a minor house. We need this alliance, Aria. Without it, we won't last the winter." "I know." "Do you?" Marcus turned to face her fully, and for the first time that night she saw something other than disappointment in his eyes. Fear. Raw, barely controlled fear. "Because from where I'm standing, you seem perfectly content to let our pack die." The accusation hit harder than she'd expected. "That's not fair." "Fair?" He laughed, a harsh sound with no humor in it. "You want to talk about fair? Your mother died keeping that pack alive. Your brother left because he couldn't stand watching it fall apart. And you're our last chance, and you can't even manage to smile at a man without looking like you'd rather be anywhere else." Aria's throat tightened. She wanted to argue, to defend herself, to point out that she hadn't asked for this responsibility, but the words stuck somewhere between her chest and her mouth. Because he was right. She didn't want to be here. She didn't want to play these games, to package herself like a product and hope someone found her valuable enough to purchase. But what she wanted didn't matter. It never had. "I'm trying," she said quietly. Marcus's expression softened slightly, but only slightly. "Try harder." He turned away, scanning the crowd for another potential target, another man who might be desperate or ambitious enough to overlook Aria's lack of assets. And Aria went back to watching. The gathering had been going for 3 hours now, and the initial formality had started to crack around the edges. Wine flowed more freely. Laughter got louder. The careful political masks people wore began to slip just enough to show the ambition and hunger underneath. Aria watched a young alpha from the Eastern Territories corner a woman in emerald silk, his hand on the wall beside her head, his smile predatory. The woman smiled back, but her eyes were calculating, already 3 moves ahead in whatever game they were playing. She watched an older beta argue with his son in sharp, clipped whispers near the fireplace, their faces flushed with anger or wine or both. She watched the server staff move through the crowd like ghosts, refilling glasses and clearing plates with practiced invisibility. And she watched the Alpha King. Cale Draven stood near the center of the hall, surrounded by advisors and pack leaders vying for his attention. He looked bored. No, not bored. Restless, like a wolf that had been caged too long and was starting to remember what teeth were for. Someone said something to him, an older man with silver hair and too many rings on his fingers. Cale's expression didn't change, but something about his posture shifted. The man took a step back, still smiling, but the smile looked strained now. Aria had never seen someone command a room just by existing before. It was fascinating and terrifying in equal measure. "Stop staring at him," Marcus hissed. "I'm not." "You are. And if you draw his attention—" "What?" Aria looked at her father. "What's the worst that could happen? He'll notice me? Maybe that's what we need." "Are you insane?" Marcus grabbed her arm hard enough to hurt this time. "Men like him don't notice girls like you unless they're looking for entertainment. And trust me, you don't want to be his entertainment." "How do you know what I want?" The words came out sharper than she'd intended, and Marcus's eyes widened. For a moment she thought he might actually slap her. His hand twitched, and she saw the impulse cross his face. But they were in public, surrounded by witnesses, and Marcus Vale was nothing if not aware of appearances. His grip loosened. "Watch your tone." "Or what?" Aria pulled her arm free. "You'll send me home? You'll marry me off to someone who treats me like a bargaining chip? I'm already living that reality, Father. It can't get much worse." "You have no idea how much worse it can get." There was something in his voice, something old and tired and deeply afraid, that made Aria pause. Before she could respond, a ripple of attention moved through the crowd like wind across water. People were turning, looking toward the entrance. A woman had arrived. She was tall, maybe in her early 40s, with silver blonde hair pulled into an intricate knot and a dress that probably cost more than Aria's entire pack was worth. She moved with the kind of confidence that came from never having been told no. "Who is that?" Aria asked. "Lady Morgan," Marcus said quietly. "The king's chief advisor. If she's here, something's about to happen." Lady Morgan cut through the crowd with purpose, heading directly toward Kyle. She leaned in, spoke quietly into his ear. Whatever she said made his expression sharpen, the restlessness crystallizing into focus. He said something back. She nodded once and withdrew. And then Kael Draven's eyes swept the room. Aria felt the weight of that gaze like a physical thing, even from across the hall. She watched as he scanned faces, dismissed them, moved on. He wasn't looking for someone specific. He was searching for something. Some quality or characteristic that only he could identify. "Don't," Marcus breathed. "Don't look at him. Don't!" But it was too late. Kael's eyes locked onto hers. The world seemed to narrow to that single point of contact. Aria couldn't look away. She couldn't breathe. She couldn't do anything except stand there, frozen, while the Alpha King stared at her like she was a puzzle he'd just decided to solve. "Oh no," Marcus whispered. "No, no, no. Look down. Now." But Aria couldn't. Something in her, some stubborn, reckless part she'd spent her whole life trying to suppress, refused to back down. So she stared back. Kael's expression didn't change, but something flickered in his eyes. Surprise, maybe. Or interest. He started walking toward her. The crowd parted automatically, conversations dying mid-sentence as people registered where he was going. Whispers erupted in his wake, a rolling wave of speculation and shock. Marcus made a strangled sound. "Aria, whatever you do, don't what? Don't be yourself." The advice was so absurd, so desperately sincere that Aria almost laughed. But then Kael was standing in front of her, close enough that she could see the faint scar along his jawline and smell the cold, clean scent of snow clinging to his coat, and laughter was the furthest thing from her mind. Up close, he was even more overwhelming. Taller than she'd expected, broader in the shoulders. His presence had gravity, pulling everything in the room toward him, whether people wanted it or not. "You," Kael said, his voice low and steady, "have been standing in the same spot all night." It wasn't a question. It was an observation, delivered with the kind of certainty that left no room for argument. Aria's mouth went dry. Yes. Why?" She blinked. "I'm sorry? Why haven't you moved?" His eyes, gray, she noticed, like winter ice, swept over her face, cataloging details. "Everyone else here is working the room. Making connections, playing the game. You're the only one who hasn't tried." Marcus stepped forward, bowing slightly, his voice oozing deference. "Your Majesty, my daughter is simply—" "I wasn't talking to you." Kael didn't even glance at him. His focus stayed locked on Aria, and the dismissal was so complete, so effortless, that her father actually flinched. The crowd had gone completely silent now. Aria could feel hundreds of eyes on her, could practically hear the gossip already forming in people's heads. She knew she should say something respectful, something careful, but her brain had apparently decided to abandon her because what came out of her mouth was, "Because no one wants to talk to me." Marcus made a strangled sound. Kael's expression didn't change. "Is that so?" "Yes." The word came out sharper than she intended, but she couldn't stop now. The dam had broken, and everything she'd been holding back all night was pouring out. "I'm from a failing pack. I have no dowry, no bloodline worth mentioning, and I'm wearing a borrowed dress. So yes, I've been standing here because trying would be a waste of everyone's time, including yours." The silence that followed was suffocating. She could feel her father's panic radiating off him in waves. Around them, conversations had stopped entirely. People were staring now, openly, waiting to see how the Alpha King would respond to being spoken to like that by a nobody from the borderlands. Aria waited for the inevitable: dismissal, anger, maybe a cold command to remove her from the hall and never show her face again. Instead, Kael smiled. It wasn't warm. It wasn't kind. But it was real. And it changed his entire face, softening the harsh lines just enough to make him look almost human. "Honest," he said, almost to himself. Then louder, "What's your name?" "Aria Vale." "Aria Vale," he repeated, like he was testing how it sounded. "From the southern borderlands." "Yes." "Your pack holds the Grey River Pass." She hesitated, surprised he knew that. "We do." "Strategic position, poor leadership." His gaze flicked briefly to her father, who looked like he wanted to sink into the floor. "Your Alpha refused my offer of support 3 years ago. Said he didn't need help from the crown." Marcus's face went pale. "Your Majesty, that was—" "A mistake," Kael finished. "I know. He turned back to Aria. Do you agree with your alpha's decisions? It was a trap. It had to be. But Aria was so far past caring about traps that she answered honestly. No. Why not? Because pride doesn't keep people warm in winter, and it doesn't stop rival packs from taking what they want when you're too weak to defend it. Another silence. This one felt different, heavier. Kael studied her for a long moment, and Aria couldn't tell if she'd just signed her own death warrant or done something completely unpredictable. Finally, he stepped back and addressed the room at large, his voice carrying easily over the murmur of whispers. I'm choosing Aria Vale. The hall erupted. Shock rippled through the crowd like a stone thrown into still water. People turned to each other, talking over each other, voices rising in disbelief and speculation. Aria's brain couldn't process the words. What? Her father looked like he'd been struck by lightning. Your Majesty, this is... Prepare her things, Kael said, still speaking to the room, to his advisors, to anyone except Aria herself. She'll be leaving with me tonight. Wait! Aria's voice came out strangled. You can't just... Now he looked at her, and there was something almost amused in his expression. I can't? I don't want this. You don't know what this is yet. I know I don't want to be decided for. The words tumbled out before she could stop them, reckless and raw. I'm not an alliance token. I'm not a political tool you can just pick up because you're bored. Aria, her father said sharply, his hand closing around her arm. Stop talking. But Kael held up a hand and Marcus froze mid-reach. Let her speak. Aria's heart was hammering so hard she thought it might crack a rib. Why me? You don't know me. You don't... I know enough, Kael said simply. You're honest. You're ignored. And you clearly don't care about playing games. He tilted his head slightly. Those are rare qualities here. That's not a reason to... It's reason enough. He gestured to Lady Morrigan, who had materialized at his elbow like a silver ghost. Escort her to the guest wing. Make sure she has everything she needs. The advisor moved immediately, but Aria didn't. She stood rooted to the spot, her mind spinning. This couldn't be happening. This didn't make sense. She was nobody. He was the most powerful wolf in the Northern Territories. There had to be an angle, a strategy, something she was missing. Kael leaned in slightly, just close enough that only she could hear. You can refuse if you want. I won't force you. She looked up at him, searching his face for the trick, the angle, the thing she was missing. His expression was unreadable. But if you stay here, he continued quietly, you'll spend the rest of the night being invisible. And then you'll go home to a dying pack and a father who blames you for it. So the question is, would you rather be invisible there or take a risk here? Aria's throat tightened. Because he was right. He was absolutely infuriatingly right. She hated him for it. Fine, she said, her voice hoarse. I'll go. Something flickered in his eyes, satisfaction, maybe, or something darker. Good. He turned and walked away without another word, leaving Aria standing there with her father clutching her arm and the entire hall staring at her like she'd just sprouted wings. What did you do? Marcus whispered, his voice shaking. What the hell did you just do? Aria pulled her arm free. I have no idea. But as Lady Morrigan approached and gestured for her to follow, as the crowd parted and whispers exploded in her wake, one thought kept circling through her head. She'd spent her whole life being invisible. Maybe it was time to see what happened when someone actually looked. The guest wing was quieter than the main hall, but not by much. Aria could still hear the distant hum of voices, the occasional burst of laughter, the low thrum of music. It felt surreal, walking through corridors lined with tapestries and polished stone, following a woman who hadn't spoken a single word to her since they'd left the gathering. Lady Morrigan moved with the kind of efficiency that suggested she'd walked these halls 1,000 times before. Her heels clicked against the stone in a steady rhythm that somehow felt more ominous than comforting. Aria tried to keep up, but her legs felt disconnected from her body. Everything felt disconnected, like she was watching this happen to someone else. Excuse me, she said finally, her voice echoing slightly in the empty corridor. Can you tell me what's happening? Lady Morgan didn't slow down. You've been chosen by the Alpha King. I know that part. I mean, why? What does he want with me? That's not my concern. It's definitely my concern. That at least made the advisor pause. She turned to face Aria, her expression cool and assessing. You spoke to him honestly. You challenged him publicly. And instead of putting you in your place, he chose you. Draw your own conclusions. I can't draw conclusions from information I don't have. Then you'll have to wait until tomorrow to ask him yourself. Lady Morgan resumed walking. Until then, you're to stay in your quarters and not cause any trouble. I don't cause trouble. You just talked back to the Alpha King in front of 300 witnesses. That's either bravery or stupidity, and right now, I'm not sure which. Aria had no response to that. They walked in silence for another minute before Lady Morgan stopped at a heavy wooden door and pushed it open, revealing a room that was bigger than Aria's entire family home. The space was overwhelming. A four-poster bed dominated one wall, draped in dark blue fabric that looked soft enough to drown in. A fireplace crackled with fresh logs, casting warm light across furniture that was simultaneously elegant and functional. Thick rugs covered the stone floor. Windows overlooked a snow-covered courtyard where torches flickered in the darkness. It was the kind of room powerful people lived in. Aria didn't belong here. "Wait here," Lady Morgan said curtly. "Someone will bring your things." I don't have things," Aria said. "Just what I'm wearing." The advisor's expression didn't change. "Then someone will bring you things." She paused at the door. "The king will speak with you tomorrow. Until then, don't leave this room." "Why not?" "Because I said so." And with that she left, closing the door behind her with a solid thunk. Aria stood in the middle of the room, her heart still racing, her thoughts a tangled mess. She'd just been chosen by the Alpha King. She'd just agreed to leave with him. She had no idea what came next. The silence pressed down on her, thick and suffocating. She crossed to the window and looked out at the courtyard below. Guards patrolled the perimeter in pairs, their breath misting in the cold air. Beyond the walls, she could see the dark line of the forest and the mountains rising behind it, jagged and unforgiving. Somewhere out there was home, the small, struggling pack she'd left behind. Her father probably still standing in that hall, trying to process what had just happened. The people who'd spent her whole life treating her like she was disposable. And here she was, in a room that cost more than her pack made in a year, waiting to find out what the Alpha King wanted with her. Aria pressed her forehead against the cold glass and closed her eyes. "What the hell have I gotten myself into?" she whispered. The room, predictably, didn't answer. A knock at the door made her jump. "Come in," she called, turning away from the window. A young woman entered, carrying an armful of fabric. She was maybe Aria's age, with dark hair pulled into a practical bun and eyes that darted nervously around the room before settling on Aria. "My lady," she said, her voice soft, "I've brought you some clothes for tomorrow, and night clothes for this evening." "I'm not a lady," Aria said automatically. The woman blinked. "But the king chose you." "That doesn't make me a lady. It makes me... I don't know what it makes me." A small smile tugged at the corner of the woman's mouth. "It makes you someone important enough that Lady Morgan sent me up here with the good linens." She set the clothes on the bed and started smoothing out wrinkles. "I'm Elena, by the way. I work in the household staff." "Aria." "I know." Elena's smile widened slightly. "Everyone knows. You're all anyone's talking about downstairs." Aria's stomach sank. "What are they saying?" "That you told the king he was wasting his time, that you refused to bow to him, that you're either the bravest person in the Northern Territories or the stupidest." Elena paused. "For what it's worth, I think it's brave." "Thanks," Aria said, though she wasn't sure bravery was the right word. Reckless, maybe. Self-destructive. But not brave. Elena finished with the clothes and turned to face her. "Do you need anything else? Food? Water? I can bring up a tray if you're hungry." Aria's stomach growled in response, reminding her that she'd been too nervous to eat at the gathering. "Food would be good," she admitted. "I'll be right back." Elena headed for the door, then paused. "Can I ask you something?" "Sure." "Why did you say yes? When the king chose you, you could have refused. He said you could. So why didn't you?" Aria opened her mouth to answer, then closed it again. Because she didn't know. Or maybe she did, but she didn't want to admit it. I was tired of being invisible, she said finally. Elena nodded like that made perfect sense. I get that. She left, and Aria was alone again. She crossed to the bed and sat down carefully, half expecting the mattress to be too soft or too hard or somehow wrong. But it was perfect. Of course it was. Everything in this room was perfect. Everything except her. The clothes Elena had brought were beautiful. Simple, but well made. A deep green dress that would probably fit her better than the borrowed things she was wearing. Night clothes that looked softer than anything she'd ever owned. Aria ran her fingers over the fabric and tried to imagine what tomorrow would bring. A conversation with the Alpha King, an explanation for why he'd chosen her, maybe an assignment, a role to play, some political maneuver she was meant to facilitate. Or maybe he'd wake up and realize he'd made a mistake. That seemed more likely. She stood and crossed to the mirror hanging on the far wall. The girl staring back at her looked exhausted, dark circles under her eyes, hair falling out of its braid. The borrowed dress wrinkled from hours of standing in the same position. This was who the Alpha King had chosen. Aria couldn't make sense of it. Another knock at the door. Elena returned with a tray loaded with bread, cheese, cold meat, and fruit. The smell alone made Aria's mouth water. Eat, Elena said, setting the tray on a small table near the fireplace. You look like you're about to collapse. Thanks, Aria said dryly. But she ate anyway, because Elena was right. She was exhausted, and the food was better than anything she'd had in months. Real bread, not the flat, dense stuff they made back home. Cheese that actually had flavor. Meat that hadn't been dried and salted within an inch of its life. She ate slowly, savoring each bite, while Elena busied herself stoking the fire and turning down the bed. Do you work for the king directly? Aria asked between bites. Not directly. I'm part of the household staff, so I answer to the head housekeeper, who answers to Lady Morrigan, who answers to the king. Elena glanced at her. But if you need anything, you can ask me. I'll do what I can. Why? Elena shrugged. Because you seem nice, and because half the people in this place could use someone knocking them down a peg or two. If you can do that, I'm on your side. Aria laughed despite herself. I'm not trying to knock anyone down. Maybe not, but you did it anyway. Elena finished with the bed and headed for the door. Get some rest. Tomorrow's going to be intense. Wait, Aria called. Can you tell me anything about him? The king? Elena paused, considering. He's fair, ruthless when he needs to be, but fair. He doesn't tolerate incompetence or dishonesty, and he's smarter than most people give him credit for. She tilted her head. Why'd you ask? Because I have no idea what he wants from me. Maybe he doesn't either, Elena said. Maybe that's why he chose you. And with that cryptic statement, she left. Aria finished eating and changed into the nightclothes, which were indeed softer than anything she'd ever owned. She climbed into the enormous bed and pulled the covers up to her chin, staring at the ceiling. Tomorrow, she'd talk to the Alpha King. Tomorrow, she'd find out what this all meant. Tomorrow, her life would change in ways she couldn't predict. But tonight, for the first time in longer than she could remember, Aria Vale wasn't invisible. And that, at least, was something. She closed her eyes and let exhaustion pull her under, into dreams filled with gray eyes and unanswered questions. Aria woke to someone shaking her shoulder. She jerked upright, heart pounding, instinct screaming danger before her brain caught up. For a disorienting second, she didn't know where she was. The room was too big, too warm, too quiet. Then she saw Elena standing beside the bed, looking apologetic. Sorry, the young woman said quickly, but Lady Morrigan sent me. The king wants to see you. Now. Aria's stomach dropped. Now? What time is it? Just past dawn. She'd barely slept. Every time she'd started to drift off, her mind had jerked her back awake with images of gray eyes and impossible choices. I need to get dressed, Aria said, throwing back the covers. Already laid out for you. Elena gestured to the green dress draped over a chair. I'll help. 10 minutes later, Aria was dressed, her hair brushed and rebraided, her face washed with cold water that did nothing to wake her up. She looked marginally more presentable than she had the night before, but not by much. Elena walked her through a maze of corridors until they reached a set of double doors, guarded by two wolves who looked like they could break her in half without trying. "He's expecting you," one of them said, pushing the door open. The room beyond was an office, large but not ostentatious. A desk covered in papers and maps, bookshelves lining one wall, windows that let in weak morning light. And standing at one of those windows, looking out at the snow-covered grounds, was Kyle Draven. He didn't turn when she entered. "Close the door," he said. Aria did, her hands shaking slightly. The click of the latch sounded too loud in the quiet room. "Did you sleep?" Kyle asked, still not looking at her. "Some." Liar. The casual certainty in his voice made her bristle. "How would you know?" "Because I didn't." Now he turned and she saw the truth of it in his face. He looked tired, not exhausted, but like he'd spent the night working instead of resting. "I had reports to review, decisions to make, and a very angry council to deal with. Because of me." "Because of me," he corrected. "You're just the catalyst." Aria crossed her arms. "So this is about politics?" "Everything's about politics." Kale moved away from the window and leaned against his desk, studying her. "But that's not why I chose you." "Then why did you?" "I told you last night. You're honest." "That's not a reason." "It is to me." He tilted his head. "Do you know how many people in that hall last night were lying? To me, to each other, to themselves? Nearly all of them. They smile and bow and say exactly what they think I want to hear. It's exhausting. And you think I won't do that? I know you won't. You already proved it." Something that might have been amusement flickered across his face. "You told me I was wasting my time. In front of everyone. Most people wouldn't have the nerve." "Most people aren't desperate." "Is that what you are? Desperate?" Aria met his gaze. "Yes." The honesty seemed to surprise him, or maybe satisfy him. She couldn't tell. "Good," Kyle said. "Desperate people make interesting choices." "Is that what I am to you? Interesting?" "Among other things." He pushed off the desk and circled around it, pulling out a chair. "Sit." It wasn't a request. Aria sat. Kyle remained standing, which put him at an advantage. He had to know that. Everything about the way he moved suggested someone who understood power dynamics on an instinctive level. "Here's the situation," he said. "You agreed to come with me. That means you're under my protection now. It also means you're part of my household, which makes you everyone's business." "I didn't agree to be part of your household. I agreed to—" She stopped because she didn't actually know what she'd agreed to. "What did I agree to?" "To take a risk." Kale's expression was unreadable. "The specifics are still being determined." "That's not an answer." "It's the only one I have right now." He leaned forward slightly. "The council is furious. They think I've lost my mind choosing some unknown girl from a failing pack. They're demanding explanations I can't give them because I'm still figuring this out myself." Aria's chest tightened. "Then send me home. If I'm causing problems—" "No." The word was flat and absolute. "Why not?" "Because I don't make decisions based on what the council wants. I make them based on what I want." His eyes locked onto hers. "And I want you here." The intensity in his voice made her breath catch. This wasn't political. This was something else, something she didn't understand. "For how long?" she asked quietly. "As long as it takes." "For what?" Kyle smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. "That's what we're going to find out." Before Aria could respond, the door opened and Lady Morrigan strode in without knocking. "The council's here," she said curtly. "They're demanding an audience." Kyle's expression didn't change. "Tell them I'm busy." "I did. They're insisting." "Then let them insist." He glanced at Aria. "You're coming with me." "What? No, I don't—" "You're a part of this now," Kale said, already moving toward the door. "You might as well see what you've gotten yourself into." Aria looked at Lady Morrigan, hoping for some kind of intervention, but the advisor just shrugged. "He's made up his mind," she said. "There's no point arguing." So Aria followed, her stomach churning, as Kyle led them through more corridors to a set of ornate doors that opened into a council chamber. The room was full of wolves who looked like they wanted to eat her alive. There were maybe 20 of them, seated around a long table carved from dark wood, alphas and senior betas, judging by their posture and the expensive clothes they wore. They all turned when Kael entered, and the hostility in the room was thick enough to choke on. "Your Majesty," one of them said, standing. He was older, maybe 60, with iron-gray hair and a scar that ran from his temple to his jaw. "We need to discuss your recent decision." "Do we?" Kael took his seat at the head of the table, gesturing for Aria to stand behind him. She did, feeling exposed and ridiculous. "You chose a mate in front of the entire gathering," another council member said. This one was younger, maybe 40, with sharp features and sharper eyes. "Without consultation, without discussion, you simply pointed at some girl and announced she was yours." "I'm aware of what I did, Counselor Thorne." "Then perhaps you can explain it to us," the older man, she thought his name was Brennan, said. "Because from where we're sitting, it looks like you've lost your mind." Murmurs of agreement rippled around the table. Kael's expression remained calm. "I chose someone. That's well within my rights as king." "You chose a nobody," Thorne snapped. "A girl from a pack so weak they can barely feed themselves. What possible strategic value does she bring?" "Strategic value," Kael repeated slowly. "Is that what you think this is about?" "Isn't it?" Brennan spread his hands. "Every decision you make affects the stability of the Northern Territories. Choosing a mate is a political act, whether you like it or not, and you chose someone who brings nothing to the table." Aria felt her face burn. She wanted to disappear, to sink through the floor and never come back. But Kael just leaned back in his chair, looking almost bored. "You're assuming I chose her for political reasons." "Then why?" another council member demanded. "What does she have that the daughters of powerful packs don't?" "A spine." The room went silent. Kael's gaze swept the table, and Aria saw several council members shift uncomfortably. "She told me I was wasting my time, to my face, in front of 300 witnesses. When was the last time any of you did that?" No one answered. "That's what I thought." Kael stood, and the council members automatically straightened. "I don't need another political alliance. I have plenty of those. What I need is someone who isn't afraid to tell me the truth, even when it's inconvenient." "That's insane," Thorne said flatly. "You're risking the stability of the kingdom for what? Novelty? Entertainment?" "I'm risking nothing." Kael's voice went cold. "And if you question my judgment again, Counselor, you'll find yourself reassigned to the eastern borderlands. I hear it's lovely this time of year." Thorne's face went pale. Brennan cleared his throat. "Your Majesty, we're simply trying to understand." "There's nothing to understand. I made a choice. You'll respect it." Kael glanced at Aria. "She stays." "For how long?" someone asked. "As long as I decide." The council erupted in protest, voices overlapping in a chaos of objections and concerns. Aria stood frozen, watching it all spiral out of control. This was her fault. Her presence had sparked this, and she had no idea how to fix it. Kael let them argue for maybe 30 seconds before he slammed his hand on the table. The sound cracked through the room like a whip. "Enough!" Silence fell immediately. "You've made your objections clear," Kael said, his voice deadly calm. "They're noted and dismissed. This meeting is over." "Your Majesty, over." The finality in his tone left no room for argument. The council members stood slowly, shooting venomous looks at Aria as they filed out. When the last one had left, Kael turned to her. "Well," he said, "that went about as well as expected." Aria couldn't speak. Her throat felt like it was closing. "Are you all right?" Kael asked, and for the first time she heard something almost like concern in his voice. "They hate me," she managed. "They hate change. You're just the embodiment of it." He moved closer, his expression softening slightly. "You handled that better than I expected. I didn't do anything." "Exactly. You didn't try to defend yourself or explain yourself or make excuses. You just stood there." He paused. "Most people can't do that." "Most people aren't being told they're worthless in front of a room full of strangers." Something flickered in Kael's eyes. "You're not worthless. Tell them that." "I just did." He reached out like he was going to touch her shoulder, then seemed to think better of it. "Come on, we're leaving." "Where are we going?" "Away from here, before I do something I'll regret." They left the council chamber and walked in silence through corridors that felt less grand and more suffocating with every step. Arya's mind was reeling. She'd just watched the most powerful wolves in the Northern Territories argue about her like she was a piece of furniture, and Kyle had defended her. She didn't know what to do with that. He led her to a smaller room, a library, she realized, with walls of books and comfortable chairs arranged around a fireplace. It felt more intimate than anywhere they'd been so far. Cale closed the door and ran a hand through his hair, the first sign of frustration she'd seen from him. That, he said, could have gone better. You think? He looked at her, and something in his expression cracked. Not much, just enough to show the exhaustion underneath. They're not wrong, you know. Choosing you was impulsive, reckless, strategically questionable. Arya's chest tightened. Then why did you do it? Because I'm tired. The admission came out quiet, almost raw. I'm tired of being strategic. I'm tired of every conversation being a negotiation. I'm tired of looking at people and wondering what they really want from me. He stepped closer. And then you stood there in that hall and told me the truth. Just the truth. No games, no angle. And I thought, when was the last time someone did that? That's not a good enough reason to upend your entire court. Maybe not, but it's my reason. His eyes searched her face. Do you want to leave? I meant what I said last night. I won't force you to stay. Arya opened her mouth to say yes, to take the easy way out and go back to her quiet, invisible life. But the words wouldn't come, because the truth was, she didn't want to leave. She didn't want to go back to being nothing, to being ignored, to spending the rest of her life waiting for something that would never happen. No, she said finally. I don't want to leave. Kael's expression shifted. Relief, maybe, or something darker. Good. They stood there in silence, the tension between them thick and complicated. What happens now? Arya asked. Now, Kael said, you learn what it means to be part of my world. Over the next week, Arya discovered that being part of Kael's world meant being trapped in a nightmare she couldn't escape. The court hated her. Not openly. No one was stupid enough to insult her directly where Kael might hear. But the whispers followed her everywhere. The looks, the deliberate snubs. She'd be walking down a corridor and people would fall silent, watching her pass with expressions that ranged from contempt to pity. She'd enter a room and conversations would stop. She'd sit down to meals and find herself surrounded by empty chairs. Elena tried to help, bringing her food and keeping her company when she could, but even she couldn't shield Arya from the constant, grinding hostility. They'll warm up, Elena said one afternoon, though she didn't sound convinced. Eventually. Or they'll wait until Kyle gets bored and sends me home, Arya replied. He won't. How do you know? Elena hesitated. Because he's different with you. Everyone's noticed. Arya looked up from the book she'd been pretending to read. Different how? He listens when you talk. He asks your opinion. Yesterday, he skipped a council meeting to have lunch with you. Elena leaned forward. The king doesn't skip meetings. For anyone. That lunch had been strange. Kael had shown up at her door unannounced and insisted she join him. They'd eaten in his private quarters, and he'd asked her about her pack, her childhood, her thoughts on border defense strategies. She'd answered honestly, because she didn't know how to do anything else. And he'd listened like her words actually mattered. It was the most disorienting thing she'd ever experienced. He's trying to make a point, Arya said. To the council. That's all this is. Maybe. Elena didn't look convinced. Or maybe he actually likes you. That's ridiculous. Is it? Before Arya could answer, a sharp knock interrupted them. Lady Morgan entered without waiting for permission. The king wants to see you, she said to Arya. In his study. Now. Arya's stomach sank. Did something happen? You'll find out. She followed Lady Morgan through familiar corridors to Kael's study, where she found him bent over a map, his expression grim. What's wrong? Arya asked. Kael looked up. There's been an attack. On the southern border, 3 packs hit in the last 2 days. Her blood went cold. My pack? No, but close. The Grey River Pass is probably next. Arya moved closer to the map, her mind racing. She recognized the marked locations. Small settlements, vulnerable, easy targets. Who's attacking them? She asked. We don't know yet. The survivors described wolves, but wrong somehow. Bigger, faster, more aggressive than they should be. Kale straightened. I'm sending forces to investigate, but I need to know, what can you tell me about the territory? Why are you asking me? Because you're from there. You know the land better than anyone on my council. Aria stared at the map, her mind working. She'd grown up in that region. She knew every pass, every river, every place where someone could hide or launch an ambush. Here, she said, pointing. If they're hitting settlements along the river, they're moving north, following the water. There's a narrow pass just above the Grey River territory. If they come through there, they'll have access to the entire northern borderland. But Kale leaned in, studying where she was pointing. Can it be defended? Yes, but not by my pack alone. They're too small. Then we'll reinforce them. He made a mark on the map. What else? Aria hesitated. This was insane. She wasn't a strategist. She had no military training. She was just a girl who'd grown up poor and desperate. But Kael was looking at her like she had answers, so she gave them. They spent the next hour going over the map, planning defensive positions, discussing supply lines and communication routes. Aria found herself speaking faster, more confidently, pointing out details she didn't even know she remembered, and Kael listened to every word. When they finally finished, he sat back and looked at her with something that might have been respect. You're better at this than half my military advisors, he said. I just know the land. No, you understand how terrain affects strategy. That's different. He paused. Would you be willing to present this to the council? Aria's chest tightened. They won't listen to me. They will if I make them. That's not the same as them respecting me. Respect is earned, Kael said. This is how you start. The council meeting was exactly as horrible as Aria had feared. She stood at the front of the room, acutely aware of every hostile stare, every skeptical expression. Her hand shook as she pointed out positions on the map, explaining the defensive strategy she and Kael had worked out. Halfway through, Councillor Thorne interrupted. With all due respect, he said, though his tone suggested no respect at all, why should we listen to someone with no military experience? Because she knows the territory, Kael said sharply. She's a civilian from a failing pack. What could she possibly— More than you, apparently, Aria cut in. The room went silent. Thorne's face darkened. Excuse me? You've never been to the southern borderlands, Aria said, her voice steadier than she felt. You don't know how the rivers flow or where the pass is narrow. You're sitting here dismissing my input because you think I'm worthless. But if you actually cared about defending those territories, you'd listen instead of posturing. Someone gasped. Kael didn't intervene. He just watched, his expression unreadable. Thorne stood slowly. You have no idea what you're talking about. Then prove me wrong. Aria met his gaze. Show me on the map where you'd position defenses. I don't have to prove anything to you. Because you can't. The words came out sharper than she intended. You don't know the terrain. You just don't want to admit that someone you consider beneath you might actually have valuable information. The silence was suffocating. Thorne's hand clenched into a fist, and for a second Aria thought he might actually hit her. Then Kael stood. Councillor Thorne, he said quietly, sit down. It wasn't loud, it wasn't aggressive, but the command in his voice was absolute. Thorne sat. Kael turned to the rest of the council. Aria's strategy is sound. We'll implement it immediately. Any objections? No one spoke. Good. Meeting dismissed. As the council filed out, shooting venomous looks at Aria, she felt her legs start to shake. She'd just challenged a senior council member in front of everyone. She'd just made everything worse. Kael approached her as the room emptied. That, he said, was either very brave or very stupid. Probably both. Probably. But he was smiling. You surprised me. I surprised myself. Thorne's going to make your life difficult now. My life was already difficult. Kael's smile faded. I know. And I'm sorry for that. Don't be. This was my choice. Was it? His eyes searched hers. Or did I back you into a corner? Aria thought about it, really thought about it. Both, she said finally. But I'm still here. Something shifted in Kael's expression. He reached out and tucked a loose strand of hair behind her ear, the gesture so casual and intimate that it made her breath catch. "Yes," he said quietly, "you are." His hand lingered against her cheek for a moment too long. Then the door burst open and Lady Morgan rushed in, her face pale. "Your Majesty," she said urgently, "there's been another attack on the Grey River Pass. The entire settlement is gone." Aria's world tilted. Gone. Her pack. Her father. Everyone she'd known her whole life. Gone. She couldn't breathe, couldn't think, couldn't... Kael's hands gripped her shoulders, holding her steady. "Breathe," he commanded. "Aria, breathe." She sucked in air that tasted like ash. "Survivors?" Kael asked Lady Morgan, his eyes never leaving Aria's face. "Unknown. The scouts are still searching. Send everyone we have now." "Yes, Your Majesty." Lady Morgan left, and Kael pulled Aria against his chest, holding her while she shook. "I have to go," she whispered. "I have to. You're not going anywhere near there until we know it's safe. They're my people, and you can't help them if you're dead." His arms tightened around her. "I won't lose you too." The words hung in the air between them, heavy with meaning. Neither of them was ready to examine. Aria pulled back just enough to look at him. "This is my fault. If I'd warned them sooner..." "This isn't your fault." "You don't know that." "I do." Kael's jaw clenched. "Whatever's happening, whoever's behind this, it's not random. They're targeting border packs deliberately, testing our defenses." His eyes darkened. "And I'm going to find out why." The war room filled within minutes. Kael hadn't let go of Aria yet. She stood in the circle of his arms, numb and shaking, while commanders and advisors filed in with maps and reports and grim expressions that told her everything she needed to know. Her home was gone. Initial reports confirmed total destruction, a grizzled commander named Rourke said, spreading a blood-stained map across the table. "Whatever hit them moved fast. Burned everything. The few tracks we found don't make sense. Too big. Spaced wrong. Like wolves, but not." "Survivors?" Kael's voice was sharp. "We found 12, mostly children and elderly who'd been in the outer caves when the attack hit." Rourke's jaw tightened. "The rest? We're still counting bodies." Aria's knees buckled. Kael's arms tightened, holding her upright. "My father," she managed. "Marcus Vale. Did you find..." "Not yet." Not yet meant probably dead. She knew that. Everyone in the room knew that. "The pattern's accelerating," Lady Morgan said, pointing to marks on the map. 5 settlements in 8 days. Always border packs. Always at night. And they're moving north. "Toward us?" Thorne said. He stood across the table, his expression calculating rather than sympathetic. "This is what happens when we spread our resources thin defending worthless territories." "Watch it," Kael said quietly, but Thorne pressed on. "I'm simply stating facts, Your Majesty. We've lost men defending packs that contribute nothing to the kingdom, men we need for real threats." "Real threats?" Aria's voice came out hoarse. She pulled away from Kael, facing Thorne across the table. "My pack just got slaughtered. What's more real than that?" "Your pack was a drain on resources," Thorne said coldly. "Harsh, perhaps, but true. They refused aid 3 years ago, refused to integrate into proper defense networks. They insisted on independence they couldn't afford, and now they've paid the price. They were people, families, children, who are dead because their leadership was too proud to accept help when it was offered." Thorne's eyes were merciless. "That's not our failure. That's theirs." Aria felt something crack inside her chest, because he wasn't completely wrong. Her father had refused the crown's help, had insisted they could manage alone, that accepting aid would mean admitting weakness, and now everyone was dead. "Enough," Kael said, his voice cutting through the tension. "This isn't the time for blame. We need solutions." "Pull back our defensive lines," Thorne said immediately. "Consolidate around major territories and let the borderlands fend for themselves. If they want protection, they can migrate inward or accept full integration." "That's abandonment," Rourke growled. "There are dozens of small packs out there. You're talking about leaving thousands of people to die." "I'm talking about strategic triage. We can't defend everywhere. He's right. Everyone turned to stare at Aria. She swallowed hard, forcing herself to meet their eyes. Counselor Thorne is right. We can't defend everywhere. The territory's too spread out, the settlement's too scattered. Whoever's doing this knows that. They're picking off isolated packs because there's no coordinated defense. Thorne's eyebrows rose slightly, surprised she was agreeing with him. But pulling back isn't the answer either, Aria continued. Because once you abandon the borderlands, you lose your early warning system. By the time these things reach your consolidated territories, they'll have grown in number and confidence. You'll be fighting them in your own backyard instead of the wilderness. So what's your solution? Lady Morgan asked, and there was actual curiosity in her voice. Aria looked down at the map, at the pattern of attack spreading like a disease across the southern territories. Her mind raced, connecting pieces, seeing patterns she'd grown up understanding without knowing she understood them. A trap, she said quietly. Kael leaned forward. Explain. They're hunting, following prey patterns. Hit the weak, avoid the strong, move fast before reinforcements arrive. She traced the attack route with her finger. But they're also getting bolder. The time between attacks is shrinking. They're gaining confidence, maybe even getting hungry for bigger targets. Your point? Thorne said impatiently. My point is that confident predators make mistakes. They start taking risks they shouldn't. Aria looked up at Kael. What if we give them a target they can't resist? A settlement that looks vulnerable but isn't. Draw them into a killing ground and end this before they reach the heart of the kingdom. Silence filled the room. That's insane, someone said. That's suicide, another voice added. But Kael was staring at her with an expression she couldn't read. You're talking about using people as bait. I'm talking about using soldiers who know what they're signing up for, not defenseless families. Aria's hands clenched on the edge of the table. Put together a force that looks like frightened refugees. Make it obvious. Make it tempting. And when these things attack, you'll have warriors waiting. And if they don't take the bait, Thorne asked, then we've lost nothing but time. But if they do, if we can kill enough of them, capture one, learn what they are, we'll have information, and information wins wars. Rourke was nodding slowly. The Hollow Creek settlement. It's already been evacuated. People fled after the third attack. We could stage it there. No, Thorne said sharply. This is exactly the kind of reckless thinking I warned about. We'd be risking trained soldiers on the word of a girl with no military experience. She has more field sense than you do, Kael interrupted. And I'm tired of your objections, Counselor. Your Majesty, you can't seriously be considering— I'm not considering it. I've decided. Kael's voice carried absolute authority. We implement Aria's plan. Rourke, assemble your best hunters. Make it look convincing. I want this ready within 2 days. Yes, Your Majesty. And I'm going with them, Aria said. The room erupted. Absolutely not, Kael said immediately. It's my plan. I know the territory better than anyone here. You should stay here where it's safe. Safe? Aria laughed, a harsh sound with no humor in it. My entire pack just got wiped out while I was here being safe. I'm not sitting in a comfortable room while other people execute my strategy. Aria, no. She met his eyes, unflinching. You said you chose me because I was honest. Because I didn't play games. Well, here's honesty. I'm going. Either as part of your force or on my own. Your choice. Kael's jaw clenched. This is not a negotiation. You're right, it's not. Because I've already made up my mind. The silence that followed was deadly. Lady Morgan cleared her throat. Perhaps we should discuss this privately. There's nothing to discuss, Kael said, his eyes never leaving Aria's. She's not going. Then I'll leave, Aria said quietly. Tonight. I'll find what's left of my pack, help the survivors, do something useful instead of standing around being decoration for your court. You'll do no such thing. Watch me. They stared at each other across the table, the tension so thick it was suffocating. Everyone else in the room seemed to be holding their breath. Finally, Kael spoke, his voice low and dangerous. Everyone out. The room cleared in seconds. The moment the door closed, Kael rounded on her. What the hell do you think you're doing? Standing up for myself. I thought you'd appreciate that. This isn't about pride. This is about keeping you alive. Why? The question burst out of her, raw and desperate. Why do you care? You barely know me. I'm just some girl you chose on a whim. You're not. Kael moved closer, and she saw something in his eyes that made her breath catch. You were never just some girl. Then what am I? I don't know yet. But I know I can't lose you. The admission hung between them, heavy with implications neither of them seemed ready to face. This matters to me, Aria said quietly. Those people out there, the ones still alive, still fighting, they're all I have left. I can't abandon them. And if you die? Then at least I died trying to protect something instead of hiding. Kael's hands clenched into fists. She could see him struggling, weighing options, calculating risks. If I let you go, he said finally, you follow orders. Rourke's orders. You don't take unnecessary risks. You don't play hero. Understood? I'm not a soldier. I can't promise to follow. Then you don't go. Aria bit back a sharp response. Because he was right. This wasn't her area of expertise. She knew terrain, not tactics, strategy, not combat. Fine, she said. I'll follow orders. I mean it, Aria. One reckless move and I'm pulling you out myself. Understood. Kael studied her face, searching for something. Whatever he found there didn't seem to reassure him. This is a mistake, he said quietly. Maybe, but it's my mistake to make. No. His hand came up, cupping her cheek. It's mine, for caring about you enough to let you go. The touch sent heat through her entire body. She couldn't breathe, couldn't think, couldn't do anything except stare at him. Don't die, Kael said, and it sounded like a command and a plea all at once. I'll try not to. He pulled her against him then, his arms wrapping around her with a desperate intensity that spoke louder than words. Aria pressed her face into his chest and let herself have this moment, this brief respite before everything went to hell. Because she knew, with absolute certainty, that one of them was about to make a choice they couldn't take back. 2 days later, Aria stood in the ruins of Hollow Creek Settlement, surrounded by warriors pretending to be refugees. The place looked convincing. Hastily erected shelters, scattered supplies, fires burning low like people were trying to conserve fuel. Rourke had even brought actual families from nearby settlements, volunteers who knew the risks and had agreed to help sell the illusion. It made Aria's stomach turn. You look green, Rourke said, appearing at her elbow. The grizzled commander had barely spoken to her during the journey south, but he hadn't objected to her presence either. Small victories. I'm fine. You're not, but that's normal. First time heading into real danger, your body remembers how to be afraid. He handed her a short blade. Keep this on you, just in case. Aria took the weapon, feeling its weight. She'd never held anything meant for killing before. I thought I was supposed to stay with the civilians, she said. You are, but civilians can defend themselves if they have to. Rourke's expression was grim. These things were hunting. If they're what the survivors described, you'll want steel in your hand when they come. What did the survivors say exactly? That they looked like wolves, moved like wolves, but their eyes were wrong, empty, and they didn't stop when they should have, took injuries that should have dropped them and kept coming. He paused. A few survivors swore they were already dead, that they smelled like rot and old blood. That's impossible. Yeah, that's what worries me. A howl echoed across the valley, distant and wrong-sounding. Everyone froze. Positions, Rourke said quietly. Civilians to the center, warriors on the perimeter. And remember, let them think they're winning until I give the signal. People scattered, moving with practiced efficiency. Aria followed the designated civilians to the central fire, her heart hammering. This had been her idea. If people died tonight, it would be her fault. The woman next to her, Sarah, mother of two, squeezed her hand. It'll be all right, she whispered. We knew what we were getting into. But Aria could see the fear in her eyes. Another howl, closer this time, and another, and another. They were coming. The attack happened faster than Aria expected. One moment, the perimeter was quiet. The next, shapes exploded from the darkness. Massive forms that moved with unnatural speed, crashing through the fake shelters and scattering fires. Screams erupted. Civilians ran exactly as they were supposed to, creating chaos and confusion. and Arya got her first good look at what they were fighting. The creatures looked like wolves, but Rourke was right. Something was fundamentally wrong with them. Too big, muscles bulging under fur that looked patchy and diseased. Their eyes caught the firelight and reflected it back dead and flat, like glass. And they smelled. Even from 20 feet away, Arya could smell rot and corruption. One of them locked onto her. Time seemed to slow as it charged, covering the distance impossibly fast. Arya stumbled backward, the knife feeling useless in her hand. The creature lunged, and Rourke materialized from nowhere, his blade taking it across the throat in one smooth motion. Black blood sprayed across the snow. The thing should have died. The wound was fatal. Instead, it turned on Rourke, jaws snapping, that dead gaze never changing. "Now!" Rourke roared. Warriors appeared from every direction, surrounding the attacking creatures. Steel flashed in the firelight. Blood, both red and that wrong, dark black, spattered across snow and ash. It wasn't a battle. It was a massacre. The creatures fought with mindless ferocity, but they were outnumbered and outmaneuvered. One by one, they fell, though it took multiple killing blows to put each one down permanently. Aria watched it all, frozen, her mind cataloging details. The way they moved, the way they attacked, the way they died. These weren't animals, they were weapons. Someone screamed behind her. Arya spun and saw a smaller creature, one they'd missed in the initial count, dragging Sarah toward the tree line. She didn't think. She just ran. The knife felt alive in her hand as she closed the distance. The creature sensed her coming and turned, releasing Sarah to face this new threat. Up close, it was even worse. She could see the stitching, actual stitching, like someone had sewn pieces of different wolves together. What the hell was this thing? It lunged. Arya dove sideways, slashing wildly. The blade caught fur and flesh, opening a gash along its flank. Black blood welled up, smelling like death. The creature didn't even slow. It hit her like a battering ram, knocking her flat. Air exploded from her lungs. The knife flew from her hand, landing somewhere in the snow. Jaws snapped inches from her face. She shoved her forearm into its mouth, screaming as teeth tore through fabric and skin. Pain exploded up her arm, white-hot and nauseating, but it kept the thing from tearing out her throat. "Arya!" Rourke was coming, but he wouldn't make it in time. The creature was going to kill her. She was going to die in the snow, just like her pack, just like everyone she'd failed to save. No. The thought came with crystalline clarity. She hadn't survived this long to die like this. Her free hand scrabbled in the snow, searching desperately. Her fingers closed around something hard and sharp, a rock maybe, or a piece of broken wood. She swung it with everything she had, catching the creature in the eye. It reared back, howling. Arya rolled away, grabbed her dropped knife, and came up fighting. The creature charged again, but this time she was ready. She sidestepped at the last second, bringing the blade up and across in a move she'd never practiced but somehow knew, opening its throat wide. Black blood fountained out. The thing staggered, confused, like it couldn't understand why its body wasn't working anymore. Then it collapsed, twitching, that flat dead gaze finally going dark. Arya stood over it, breathing hard, her arms screaming with pain. Rourke reached her a second later. "Are you insane? I told you to stay with the civilians." Sarah needed help. "Sarah's alive. You almost weren't." He grabbed her injured arm, examining the bite. "That needs treatment, now." But Arya was staring at the creature's body, at the stitching she'd seen earlier, now more visible in the firelight. "Rourke," she said slowly, "these things, they're not natural." "No shit." No, I mean, look." She pointed to the crude stitching. "Someone made these. Someone took dead wolves and put them back together and sent them to attack us." Rourke followed her gaze, and his expression went from grim to horrified. "We need to tell the king, now." The ride back to the capital took 2 days, and by the time they arrived, Arya's arm was infected, and she was running a fever that made the world blur at the edges. She remembered fragments, Rourke half carrying her into the palace, voices raised in alarm, Kael's face appearing above her, furious and terrified in equal measure. Then darkness. When she woke, she was in a bed that smelled like snow and cedar. Kael's bed, she realized dimly. He sat beside her, his hand wrapped around hers, his expression exhausted. "You're an idiot," he said when her eyes opened. "Probably. I told you not to take risks." I followed orders. Right up until Sarah needed help. Aria tried to sit up and immediately regretted it. Pain lanced through her arm. Kael pushed her back down gently. The healers say you'll recover. The bite was deep, but clean enough once they treated it. The creatures? I know. Rourke told me everything. Kael's expression darkened. Someone's creating weapons, using dead wolves, necromancy or something close to it, and sending them to destabilize the borderlands. Why? That's what we're going to find out. He paused. The council's calling for your head, by the way. Aria's stomach sank. Because of the plan? Because you were right. Because the plan worked. Because you made them look foolish. Kael's hand tightened around hers. Thorn's leading the charge. Says you're a dangerous influence. That you're manipulating me, leading me into reckless decisions. Am I? I don't know. He met her eyes. Are you? Aria thought about it. Really thought about it. I don't think so, but I'm not trying to be safe anymore either. I noticed. Does that bother you? It terrifies me. The admission came out raw. Because I'm falling for you, Aria, and I can't afford to fall for anyone. The world seemed to stop. Kael, don't. He pulled his hand away. Don't say anything, just get better. We'll figure out the rest later. He stood and walked to the door. Your Majesty, Lady Morgan's voice came from the hallway. The council's assembled. They're demanding an immediate session. Of course they are. Kael looked back at Aria. Rest. I'll deal with them. But before he could leave, another voice interrupted. That won't be necessary. Counselor Thorn stepped into the room, flanked by 6 guards Aria didn't recognize. Kael's entire body went rigid. What is this? This, Thorn said calmly, is an intervention. The council has voted. Your judgment is compromised. Your decisions are endangering the kingdom. As of this moment, you are relieved of command pending a formal review. You can't. We can. We have. The majority has spoken. Thorn's gaze shifted to Aria. And she's under arrest for conspiracy, manipulation of the crown, and endangering the northern territories through reckless action. The guards moved toward the bed. Kael stepped between them and Aria, his voice dropping to something deadly. Touch her, and I'll kill you where you stand. You're no longer king, Draven. You have no authority here. Thorn nodded to the guards. Take her. And his hands closed around Aria's arms, dragging her from the bed despite her injured arm screaming in protest. She saw Kael's face, saw the rage and helplessness warring there. She'd challenged the system, and the system was fighting back. The cell was smaller than Aria's room back home had been, and that was saying something. Stone walls, stone floor, a single barred window too high to reach, and a cold that seeped into her bones no matter how tightly she wrapped the thin blanket around her shoulders. Her arm throbbed where the creature had bitten her, the bandages already seeping through with blood and something darker. The healers had barely finished treating it before Thorn's guards dragged her away. She'd been here 2 days, maybe 3. Time blurred when the only light came from that single window, cycling between gray and black and gray again. They'd taken everything. Her borrowed clothes replaced with rough prisoner's garb, the knife Rourke had given her, even the simple leather ties she'd used to bind her hair. All she had left was herself. And apparently, that wasn't enough. The sound of boots on stone made her look up. 2 guards appeared outside the cell, flanking someone she recognized. Counselor Brennan, the older man with the scar who'd been slightly less hostile than Thorn during the council meetings. Open it, he said. The guards obeyed, and Brennan stepped inside, wrinkling his nose at the smell. Aria didn't blame him. The cell had a bucket in the corner that hadn't been emptied since she'd arrived. Miss Vale, Brennan said, his tone almost conversational. How are you finding your accommodations? Aria didn't answer. She'd learned that lesson the first day when a different counselor had visited, asking leading questions designed to trap her into admitting guilt. Not talking today. Pity. I actually came to help you. Help me into a noose? Brennan's mouth twitched. Fair enough. You've earned your cynicism. He sat down on the stone bench across from her, moving carefully like his joints hurt. Let me be direct. Thorn wants you executed. Publicly. As an example of what happens when commoners overstep their bounds. Aria's stomach clenched, but she kept her expression neutral. And you? I think you're dangerous, but not in the way Thorne believes. Brennan studied her face. You disrupted a carefully balanced system, made the king forget his duties, pushed strategies that got people killed. That strategy worked. We learned what we're fighting and lost 12 soldiers in the process. Soldiers with families, with children. His voice hardened. Your recklessness has consequences, girl. Real ones. The words hit harder than she wanted to admit. Because he was right, people had died. She'd known the risks intellectually, but she hadn't really understood what it meant until she'd watched that creature tear into Sarah, until she'd felt blood, hers and theirs, soaking into the snow. I know, she said quietly. Brennan seemed surprised by the admission. Do you? Yes. I think about them constantly. The ones who died. The ones who got hurt because I thought I was clever enough to outsmart an enemy we don't understand. Aria met his eyes. But I'd do it again. Because now we know these things aren't random. Someone's making them. Someone's targeting the borderlands deliberately. And if we'd done nothing, more people would have died anyway. Pretty words, but they don't bring back the dead. No, they don't. Aria's hands clenched in her lap. So tell me, what would you have done differently? Pulled back the defenses like Thorne wanted? Left the borderlands to burn? How many more settlements would we have lost while the council debated proper procedure? We would have found a solution that didn't risk trained warriors on the word of an untested civilian. You would have talked while people died. That's what councils do. Brennan's expression went cold. You have no idea what we do. Don't I? I've watched you for weeks now, arguing, positioning, protecting your territories and your pride while the kingdom falls apart around you. Aria leaned forward despite the pain in her arm. Kale was right about one thing. You're all so busy playing politics that you've forgotten what actual leadership looks like. And you think you know better? You, who've been here less than a month? I know that doing something is better than doing nothing. I know that sometimes you have to take risks because the alternative is worse. Her voice dropped. And I know that you're not here to help me. You're here to see if I'll break, if I'll give you ammunition to use against Kyle. Brennan stood slowly. You're smarter than I gave you credit for. Is that a compliment or a threat? Both. He moved toward the door, then paused. For what it's worth, I don't think you're evil. Naive, reckless, and dangerously idealistic, but not evil. Under different circumstances, you might have made a decent advisor. But instead I'm going to hang. That depends. On what? On whether the king can pull off a miracle before Thorne consolidates enough support to make the execution stick. Brennan's expression was unreadable. The council's divided. Half want you dead, a quarter don't care either way, and the rest are waiting to see which way the wind blows. If Kyle can prove your strategy had value, real, undeniable value, he might be able to save you. And if he can't, then I'd suggest you make peace with whatever gods you believe in. He left, and the guards locked the cell behind him. Aria sat in the silence, her mind racing. She'd known the situation was bad, but hearing it laid out so bluntly made it real in a way it hadn't been before. She was going to die. Unless Kyle could somehow turn the council's opinion. Unless her reckless gamble at Hollow Creek produced results that justified the cost. Unless she got very, very lucky. The sound of shouting made her look up. It was coming from somewhere above, muffled by stone and distance, but getting louder. Voices raised in anger, something that might have been a scream. The guards outside her cell exchanged nervous glances. What's happening? One of them muttered. Don't know. Stay sharp. More shouting, closer now. And underneath it, a sound that made Aria's blood run cold, howling. Multiple voices, echoing through the corridors. Those things, the second guard said, his voice shaking. They're in the palace. The first guard fumbled with his weapon. That's impossible. Security would have... The wall exploded inward. Stone and debris flew everywhere. The guards went down screaming. And through the dust and chaos, Aria saw them. 3 of the stitched creatures, their dead eyes reflecting torchlight as they prowled into the dungeon. One of them locked onto the guards, tearing into them with mechanical efficiency. The other 2 turned toward Aria's cell. She scrambled backward, pressing herself against the far wall, knowing it was useless. The bars wouldn't stop them. Nothing would stop them. This was it. This was how she died, trapped in a cell, helpless, forgotten. The creatures moved closer, their movements wrong and jerky like puppets on strings. Then someone dropped from the hole in the ceiling. Kael landed in a crouch, blade already drawn, his face a mask of cold fury. He didn't hesitate, just launched himself at the nearest creature, his strikes precise and brutal. The thing tried to fight back, but Kael moved like violence made flesh. He took it apart piece by piece until it stopped twitching. The second creature lunged at him from behind. "Down!" Aria screamed. Kael dropped flat, and Lady Morgan appeared through the smoke, her own blade taking the creature's head clean off. Silence fell, broken only by heavy breathing and the settling of debris. Kael stood and turned to Aria's cell. His eyes swept over her, cataloging injuries, assessing damage. When he saw the blood seeping through her bandages, something in his expression cracked. "Get her out," he said to Lady Morgan. The advisor picked through the rubble for keys, found them on one of the dead guards, and unlocked the cell. Aria stumbled out, her legs shaky from days of sitting. "What's happening?" "The palace is under attack," Kael said, already moving toward the hole in the ceiling. "Someone let those things inside. We're evacuating to the inner keep." Thorn is locked in his quarters with half the council, refusing to come out. Kael's voice was bitter. "Turns out when the crisis is real, they're all cowards." Lady Morgan boosted Aria up through the hole, Kael following close behind. They emerged into a corridor that looked like a war zone. Bodies, both human and creature, scattered across blood-slicked stone. "How many got in?" Aria asked. "At least 20, maybe more." Kael grabbed her uninjured arm, pulling her along. "We killed most of them, but there are still pockets fighting throughout the palace." They ran through corridors Aria recognized, though they looked different now, damaged, dangerous, filled with smoke and screaming. Palace staff huddled in corners, guards formed defensive lines, and everywhere the smell of death hung thick. They reached a fortified door guarded by soldiers who looked like they had already seen heavy fighting. "Survivors inside?" Kael asked. "Yes, Your Majesty. 73 civilians and 20 warriors." "Good. Get them ready to move to the inner keep on my signal." Kael turned to Lady Morgan. "Status on the creatures? 15 confirmed dead, 5 still active. Work's hunting them now." "And the council?" "Barricaded in the east wing. They're screaming for protection but refusing to leave their quarters." Kael's expression went dark. "Let them scream." A howl echoed from somewhere close, too close. "Get inside," Kael ordered, pushing Aria toward the door. But she didn't move, because something had just clicked in her mind, a pattern she'd been too close to see until now. "They're not hunting randomly," she said. Kael turned. "What?" "The creatures. They're not just attacking, they're moving with purpose, targeting specific areas." Aria's mind raced. "The dungeon where I was held, that wasn't strategic. It's underground, no value. But they came straight for it anyway." "They came for you," Lady Morgan said slowly. "No. They came through the dungeon to get somewhere else." Aria grabbed Kael's arm. "Where's the armory? Where do you keep weapons, supplies, anything valuable for defense?" Kael's eyes widened. 2 levels down from the dungeon, direct access through the hole they just made in my cell." Aria felt sick. "This isn't a random attack, it's a raid. They're going for your weapons." "That's insane. Those things are mindless. They're controlled. We saw the stitching, remember? Someone made them. Someone's directing them." She met his eyes. "And whoever it is knows the palace layout." Silence fell as the implication sank in. "Inside job," Lady Morgan breathed. "Someone on the inside is feeding information to whoever's creating these things." "Thorn," Aria said. "You can't prove that." "Can I?" "He locks down the council the moment the attack starts, refuses to help coordinate defense, and conveniently, the creatures avoid the East Wing entirely while tearing through everywhere else." Aria turned to Kael. "He's either working with them or he's the most cowardly counselor you've ever had. Either way, we need to stop those things from reaching the armory." Kael was already moving. "Morgan, get the civilians to safety. Aria, you're with me." "Your Majesty, she's injured." "She's also the only one who's figured out what's actually happening." Kael drew his blade. "Come on." They ran through smoke-filled corridors, heading down. Every turn revealed more carnage. Guards who died defending their posts, servants caught in the wrong place, sections of wall torn open by unnatural strength. And through it all, Aria kept moving, her arms screaming, her lungs burning, her mind working through the puzzle pieces. Someone was targeting the borderlands to create chaos. Someone had created weapons from dead wolves. Someone had insider knowledge of the palace. Someone who wanted Kael distracted and weakened. They reached the armory level to find the door already breached, hanging off its hinges. Inside, creatures swarmed over weapons and supplies, grabbing blades and armor in their jaws and dragging them toward a hole they'd torn in the far wall. "They're taking everything," Kael said, horror in his voice. But Aria was staring at something else, at the figure standing in the shadows beyond the hole, directing the creatures with hand signals. A figure in council robes. "There," she said, pointing. Kael saw him. The recognition was instant and terrible. "Counselor Drake." Drake looked up, saw them, and smiled. "Your Majesty, so glad you could join us." "You're behind this." Kael's voice was deadly calm. "You're working with whoever's creating these abominations." "Working with? Please, I am the creator." Drake gestured to the creatures, pride in his voice. "Beautiful, aren't they? The perfect soldiers. No fear, no hesitation, no moral complications. Just pure directed violence." "You're insane." "I'm pragmatic. The borderlands are a drain on resources. By eliminating them and blaming external threats, I create the perfect justification for consolidating power. Thorn and the others are too blind to see it. But once the kingdom is properly centralized—" "Under your control," Aria interrupted. Drake's eyes shifted to her. "Ah, the girl who ruined everything. You were supposed to die at Hollow Creek. My creations were supposed to eliminate you along with that strike force. But you survived. You always survive. It's become quite inconvenient." "Good," Aria said. 3 creatures detached from the group and moved toward them. Kael stepped forward, blade ready. "Run, now! I'm not leaving you. Aria, run!" But she didn't run, because she'd just seen something Drake didn't know she'd seen. A pattern in how he was signaling the creatures. A series of gestures that looked random, but weren't. He was controlling them, which meant if she could disrupt that control. One of the creatures lunged. Kael met it head-on, his blade opening its throat. It kept coming anyway, mindless and relentless. The second creature came at Aria. She dove sideways, hit the ground hard, rolled. Her injured arm caught on something and pain exploded up to her shoulder, bright and nauseating. The creature turned for another pass, and Aria saw her opening. Drake was so focused on the fight that he turned partially away, his hand signals becoming more frantic as he tried to coordinate 3 creatures at once. She grabbed a piece of broken stone from the rubble and threw it. Her aim was terrible. The stone sailed wide, missing Drake by at least 2 feet, but it clipped one of the creatures mid-charge, breaking its line of sight with its controller. The thing stumbled, confused, its dead eyes searching for direction that wasn't coming. "The eyes!" Aria shouted. "Cover their eyes! They can't get signals if they can't see him!" Kael understood immediately. He grabbed a piece of torn fabric from a fallen guard and threw it over the nearest creature's head. The thing went wild, thrashing blindly, no longer following Drake's commands. "No!" Drake's voice rose in panic. "Stop them! Kill them!" But the remaining creatures were confused now, receiving conflicting signals, their movements becoming erratic. Kael pressed the advantage, taking down the blinded one with brutal efficiency, then moving on to the next. Drake tried to run. Aria was faster. She tackled him from behind, ignoring the screaming pain in her arm, using her weight to drive him to the ground. They hit hard, Drake's head cracking against stone. "Guards!" Aria yelled. "Someone get guards down here!" Footsteps thundered from above. Rourke appeared with a squad of warriors, taking in the scene. The dead creatures, Drake pinned beneath Aria, Kyle standing over them with his blade dripping black blood. "Restrain him," Kael ordered. "And someone get those things' bodies to the healers. I want them studied. I want to know everything about how they were made." Warriors moved to obey, pulling Drake to his feet. The counselor was bleeding from a gash on his forehead, his expression dazed. "You can't prove anything," he slurred. "My word against hers." "Your creatures just attacked the palace," Rourke said flatly. "We have 30 witnesses who saw you controlling them. That's all the proof we need." Drake's face went pale. Kale turned to Aria, who was still on the ground cradling her injured arm. You figured it out. I got lucky. No. You saw a pattern no one else saw. He held out his hand. Come on, let's get you to the healers. She took his hand and let him pull her up, swaying slightly as the adrenaline started to wear off and the pain rushed in to fill the gap. The council, she started. We'll have to answer some very uncomfortable questions about how they missed a traitor in their ranks. Kale's expression was grim. And about why they were so quick to blame you instead of investigating the actual threat. They climbed back up through the damaged palace, past destruction that would take months to repair, past bodies that would need to be buried, past trauma that wouldn't heal for years. But they climbed together. The council chamber was packed when Kael called the emergency session 3 hours later. Aria stood beside him, her arm properly bandaged now, her filthy prisoner's clothes replaced with something clean. She looked like she'd been through a war, which, she supposed, she had. The counselors sat in their usual seats, but their expressions had changed. The smugness was gone, replaced by fear and uncertainty. Drake's arrest had shaken them to their foundations. Thorn stood, his face ashen. Your Majesty, I must apologize for— Sit down, Kale said, his voice cutting through the chamber like a blade. You don't get to apologize. Not yet. Thorn sat. Kale's gaze swept the room. Counselor Drake has confessed. Fully. He's been creating those creatures for 6 months, using necromancy he learned from sources he's refusing to name. His goal was to destabilize the borderlands, create fear, and push the kingdom toward centralization, with himself positioned to take control during the chaos. Murmurs of shock and horror rippled through the council. He was also, Kyle continued, the one who convinced many of you that Aria Vale was a threat, that her strategies were reckless, that she was manipulating me. His voice hardened. All while he was the actual threat, the actual manipulator, and you all fell for it. The silence that followed was crushing. Miss Vale's plan at Hollow Creek gave us our first real intelligence about what we were fighting, Kyle said. Her observation tonight allowed us to capture Drake alive and end the threat before more people died. She has, in every measurable way, proven her value to this kingdom. Brennan cleared his throat. Your Majesty, we were wrong about her, about many things. Yes, you were. Kyle turned to Aria, which is why I'm officially appointing her as my chief strategic advisor with full council privileges. The room erupted. You can't be serious. She has no experience. This is completely inappropriate. Enough! Kale's voice cracked like thunder. I am the Alpha King. I make these appointments, not you. And anyone who objects can join Drake in the dungeons. The protests died immediately. Aria stood frozen, her mind struggling to process what had just happened. Chief Strategic Advisor. Council privileges. The kind of position people spent decades working toward. Kyle was giving it to her. Your Majesty, she said quietly, I don't think— Don't, he interrupted. Don't diminish what you've done. Don't let them make you doubt yourself. He met her eyes. You earned this. Every bit of it. Slowly, one by one, the counselors stood. It started with Brennan, who bowed stiffly. Welcome to the council, Advisor Vale. Then Rourke, who grinned. About damn time. Then others, until even Thorn rose, though he looked like it physically pained him. Welcome us, he said through gritted teeth. Aria looked at all of them, these powerful wolves who'd dismissed her, mocked her, tried to have her executed, now forced to acknowledge her as an equal. It should have felt triumphant. Instead, it felt surreal. Thank you, she said, because she didn't know what else to say. Kale dismissed the council, and they filed out in silence, leaving just the two of them in the massive chamber. That was quite a gamble, Aria said once they were alone. So was choosing you in the first place. Kyle moved closer. How's your arm? Hurts, but the healers say it'll heal clean. Good. His hand came up, cupping her face. I meant what I said earlier, before Drake's attack, about falling for you. Aria's breath caught. Kale, I know the timing's terrible. I know there are 1,000 political complications. I know this is probably the worst idea I've ever had. His thumb brushed her cheekbone. But I don't care. I choose you. Not as a political move, not as strategy, just you. I'm still figuring out who I am, Aria said quietly. I don't know if I can be what you need. You already are. Kale leaned his forehead against hers. You're honest. You're brave. You call me on my mistakes and push me to be better. That's exactly what I need. Even if it makes everything more complicated? Especially then? Aria closed her eyes, letting herself have this moment. After everything, the attacks, the arrest, the near-death experiences, she deserved something good. Okay, she whispered. Okay? Okay. I choose you too. She pulled back enough to meet his eyes. But if you ever lock me in a cell again, I'm gone. Understood? Kale laughed, the sound raw and relieved. Understood. He kissed her then, slow and careful, like she was something precious he was afraid to break. And for the first time since this entire nightmare started, Aria felt like maybe, just maybe, she'd found a place where she belonged. The girl no one chose had become the woman the Alpha King couldn't live without. And the council that had tried to destroy her now had to answer to her. It wasn't the ending she'd imagined when she'd stood in that gathering hall weeks ago, invisible and forgotten. It was better. The kiss ended when someone cleared their throat loudly from the doorway. Kyle pulled back, irritation flashing across his face. This had better be important. Lady Morrigan stood in the entrance, her expression carefully neutral. Drake's talking. You'll want to hear this. The dungeons felt different this time. Aria walked through them as a free woman, as an advisor, as someone with actual power instead of a prisoner waiting to die. The guards nodded respectfully as she passed. The cells she'd spent days rotting in were already being cleaned, the damage from the creature's attack being repaired. Drake sat in the deepest cell, chains around his wrists and ankles, his face bruised from where he'd fought the guards during his arrest. He looked up when they entered, and something ugly twisted across his features. Come to gloat? He asked. Come to get answers, Kyle said. Who taught you necromancy? Drake laughed, the sound bitter. You think I'm going to just tell you? I think you're going to tell me everything if you want any chance at mercy. Mercy, Drake spat the word. From you? The king who abandons his duties to play house with a borderland whore? Kale moved so fast Aria barely saw it. One moment he was standing beside her. The next, his hand was wrapped around Drake's throat, squeezing. Say that again, Kale said quietly. Please. Drake couldn't speak, his face turning purple. Kale, Aria said. He's not worth it. For a long moment, Kale didn't move. Then he released Drake, shoving him back against the wall. Drake coughed, gasping for air. See? This is what I'm talking about. You've lost control, lost perspective, all because of her. No, Kale said. I gained perspective because of her. She showed me what this kingdom really needs. Not more politicians playing games. Not more consolidation of power. Real solutions to real problems. Noble words, but they won't save you when the other kingdoms decide you're weak. Aria stepped forward. Who else is involved? Drake, you're not smart enough to pull this off alone. Someone helped you. Someone with resources, knowledge, connections. Drake's eyes flickered. Just for a second, but she caught it. You're protecting someone, she said. Why? Because unlike you, I understand loyalty. To who? What are they offering you that's worth spending the rest of your life in chains? Drake's mouth tightened. He wasn't going to talk. Not willingly. Aria exchanged a glance with Kyle, who nodded slightly. They'd get nothing more here, not today. But as they turned to leave, Drake spoke again. It won't matter. What I started is already in motion. You stopped one attack. One. But there are more coming, bigger ones. And when they hit, your little border girl won't be able to save you. We'll see, Aria said. They left him there, his laughter echoing through the dungeons. Outside, Kael's expression was grim. He's right about one thing. If he had help, this isn't over. No, Aria agreed. It's not. But we know what to look for now, and we know the borderlands are the key. How so? Because that's where all of this started. The attacks, the stitched creatures, everything. Whoever's behind this is using the borderlands as a testing ground. She paused. Which means we need to go back there, to my territory, what's left of it. Kale studied her face. Are you sure? No, but it's where the answers are. 3 days later, they rode south with a small force, Rourke and 20 of his best warriors, Lady Morrigan for political cover, and Elena, who'd insisted on coming despite having no combat training whatsoever. Someone needs to make sure you don't get yourself killed, she'd said when Aria tried to dissuade her. The journey took a week, traveling through territories that grew progressively poorer and more damaged as they moved away from the capital. Evidence of the attacks was everywhere. Burned settlements, mass graves, refugee camps swollen with people who had nowhere else to go. Aria saw her future in their faces, or what her future would have been if Kael hadn't chosen her that night. They reached what was left of the Grey River settlement on the 8th day. Aria had prepared herself for devastation. She thought she was ready. She wasn't. Nothing remained but ash and broken stone. The small homes where she'd grown up were gone. The communal hall where her pack had gathered for meals and celebrations was a skeleton of charred beams. Even the river looked wrong, choked with debris and discolored from whatever had burned upstream. She dismounted slowly, her legs unsteady. Aria, Kale said softly. I'm fine. She wasn't, but she couldn't fall apart now. Not in front of the warriors. Not when people were counting on her to be strong. Rourke was already directing his team to search the ruins for survivors or clues. Elena stayed close to Aria, her hand resting gently on her shoulder. We don't have to do this now, Elena said. Yes, we do. Aria forced herself to move forward into the wreckage of her childhood. She found her family's home by memory more than sight. It was just another pile of ash now, indistinguishable from the others. But she knew the location, knew the view it had overlooked, knew the shape of the foundation stones. Her father would have been here when it burned. He never left during danger, always stood his ground, even when standing was suicide. Miss Vale! She turned. One of Rourke's warriors was waving from near what had been the pack's meeting house. They'd found something. Aria picked her way through the rubble, Kael and Elena following. The warrior pointed to a section of collapsed floor that had broken through to reveal a cellar beneath. There's someone down there, the warrior said, still alive. They cleared the debris carefully, revealing a small space that had somehow survived the fire. And huddled in the corner, covered in soot and barely conscious, was a figure Aria recognized. Father, she breathed. Marcus Vale looked up, his eyes unfocused. When he saw Aria, confusion crossed his face. You're dead. You have to be dead. I'm alive. She climbed down into the cellar, ignoring Kael's protest. I'm here. You're safe now. Marcus laughed, the sound broken. Safe. Nothing's safe. They came out of nowhere, killed everyone. I hid like a coward while my pack burned. You survived. That's not cowardice. Isn't it? His eyes cleared slightly, focusing on her properly. You look different, cleaner, fed. While we were dying, you were trying to stop this, Aria interrupted, trying to find out what was happening and why. Did you? Some of it. Enough to know this was deliberate. Someone wanted the borderlands destroyed. Marcus's expression hardened. Then they succeeded. They got him out of the cellar and to the healers in their camp. He was dehydrated, half-starved, suffering from smoke inhalation, but alive. One of 12 survivors out of a pack that had numbered nearly 200. That night, while Marcus slept under the healer's care, Aria sat by the river and let herself break. She didn't cry. She'd never been much of a crier. But she shook, her entire body trembling with grief and rage and guilt so heavy she could barely breathe under the weight of it. Kale found her there. He didn't say anything, just sat beside her, close enough that their shoulders touched, and waited. I should have warned them, Aria said finally. Should have sent word earlier. Should have... You did everything you could. It wasn't enough. No, it wasn't. Kale's hand found hers in the darkness. And that's something you'll have to carry. But Aria, it wasn't your fault. Drake did this. And whoever's backing him, not you. Tell that to the 188 people who died here. I would if I could. His grip tightened. But I can't. All I can do is help you make sure it doesn't happen again. Aria turned to look at him. In the moonlight, his face was all sharp angles and shadows. How? By doing what you do best, seeing patterns, finding solutions, Forcing the system to change, he paused. The borderlands can't keep existing like this. Isolated, vulnerable, ignored. They need to be integrated, protected, given the resources to defend themselves. The Council will never agree to that. It's too expensive, too complicated. The Council will agree to whatever I tell them to agree to, especially now, when they're scrambling to prove they're not complicit in Drake's treason. Kale's expression was determined. We're going to rebuild. All of it. And you're going to lead that effort. I don't know how. You'll learn. Same way you learned everything else, by jumping in and figuring it out as you go. Aria wanted to argue. Wanted to point out all the ways she was unqualified, unprepared, wrong for this responsibility. But the truth was, she wanted it. Wanted to fix the system that had failed her pack. Wanted to make sure no other borderland settlement got abandoned and forgotten. Wanted to matter. Okay, she said. Okay. Okay, I'll do it. She met his eyes. But I'm going to need help, real help, not just lip service from the Council. You'll have it, whatever you need. They sat in silence for a while, watching the river flow past the ruins of Aria's childhood. Then Kyle spoke again, his voice quiet. I need to tell you something. Aria's stomach tightened. That tone never preceded good news. What? When we get back to the capital, I'm going to formally announce our engagement. The world seemed to tilt. What? I should have asked first, I know that. But politically, it's the right move. It shows the Council I'm serious about you, about us, about the borderlands mattering. He turned to face her fully. And personally, I want this. Want you. Not as an advisor or a political asset, as my partner, my equal, my queen. Aria couldn't breathe. Kyle, I'm not. Don't say you're not ready. Don't say you're not good enough. I've heard those arguments and they're all nonsense. His hand cupped her cheek. You've earned this position 12 times over. The question is whether you want it. Did she? A month ago, the answer would have been an immediate no. The idea of being queen, of being responsible for an entire kingdom, would have terrified her into paralysis. But now she'd seen what happened when the people in power didn't care, when they played politics while people died, when they protected their own interests instead of the kingdom's. She could do better. She would do better. Yes, Aria said. I want it. Kael's smile was like sunrise. Then it settled. Just like that? Just like that. He kissed her, slow and deep and full of promises neither of them knew if they could keep. But they were going to try. The return journey took longer because they brought survivors with them. Not just the 12 from Grey River, but refugees from other destroyed settlements who'd been living rough in the wilderness. By the time they reached the capital, their small force had swelled to nearly 300 people, all of them desperate and damaged, and looking to Aria like she had answers. She didn't, but she pretended she did, because that's what they needed. The council was waiting when they arrived. Kael called an immediate session, and Aria walked into that chamber wearing travel-stained clothes and exhaustion like a second skin, but with her head high. She belonged here now. She'd earned it. Report, Kael said, addressing the room. Aria stepped forward. The borderlands are devastated. Total casualties estimated at over 2,000 across all the settlements that were hit. Infrastructure is destroyed. The survivors have nothing. No homes, no supplies, no leadership structure. She paused. We need a comprehensive rebuilding plan, and we need it now. Thorn cleared his throat. With all due respect, Advisor Vale, the kingdom doesn't have unlimited resources. Rebuilding the borderlands would cost less than fighting a war when whatever Drake started reaches the interior territories, Aria interrupted. These attacks were designed to destabilize the borderlands and push refugees toward the capital, creating chaos and straining our resources. If we don't rebuild, we're playing into their hands. She's right, Brennan said. The pattern's clear. Whoever's behind this wants us weak and divided. Then we need to identify them, another counselor said. We will, Kael said. But first we stabilize. Aria, what do you need? She'd prepared for this. Had spent the entire journey back planning, calculating, figuring out what was possible versus what was ideal. 3 things, she said. First, immediate aid, food, shelter, medical supplies. For the refugees we brought back and the ones still out there. Second, A reconstruction fund with dedicated resources for rebuilding settlements using defensible designs. Third, a new position, Warden of the Borderlands, with authority to coordinate defense and development across all frontier territories. The council erupted in objections. That's too much power. The cost would be astronomical. We can't just create new positions. Kale slammed his hand on the table. Enough. Vote now. All in favor of Aria's proposal? Silence. Then slowly, Brennan raised his hand. Aye. Rourke, who'd been given a council seat after Drake's arrest, raised his. Aye. One by one, hands went up. Some reluctantly, some quickly, but they went up. Even Thorne, after a long pause, voted in favor. Motion passes, Kyle said. Aria Vale is hereby appointed Warden of the Borderlands with full authority to implement her reconstruction plan. Aria felt something settle in her chest. Not triumph, exactly. More like purpose. Thank you, she said. I won't let you down. See that you don't, Thorne said, though his tone was less hostile than it had been. The kingdom's counting on you. I know. The meeting dissolved into logistics discussions, budget allocations, supply chains, timelines. Aria participated in all of it, her exhaustion forgotten as the plans took shape. She was doing this, really doing this. When the session finally ended hours later, Kyle pulled her aside. There's one more thing, he said. I'm making the engagement announcement tomorrow. Public ceremony, full court attendance. Are you ready? No, Aria said honestly. But I'll do it anyway. That's my girl. The ceremony was held in the Great Hall, the same place where Aria had stood invisible and forgotten just weeks ago. Now she stood at the center, wearing a dress Elena had somehow procured, deep green silk that actually fit, with silver embroidery that caught the light. Her hair was properly styled for the first time in her life. She looked like someone important. She felt like an imposter. The hall was packed. Every pack leader, every counselor, every noble and merchant and person of influence had been summoned. They watched with expressions ranging from curiosity to skepticism to barely concealed hostility. Kyle stood beside her, wearing formal robes that made him look every inch the king. When he spoke, his voice carried to every corner of the massive space. I've called you here to witness an announcement, one that will shape the future of the Northern Territories. He reached for Aria's hand. Aria Vale has proven herself as an advisor, as a strategist, as a leader. She has earned respect through action, not birthright, through courage, not politics. Murmurs rippled through the crowd. Therefore, Kyle continued, I am formally announcing our engagement. Aria will be my queen, my partner, my equal in all things. The hall exploded in reaction, gasps, whispers, a few scattered objections that were quickly hushed. Aria stood frozen, very aware of hundreds of eyes judging her, measuring her, finding her wanting. Then, from the back of the hall, someone started clapping. Elena. Of course it was Elena. The applause spread, slowly at first, then faster. Not everyone joined in. Aria could see plenty of people standing silent, their faces disapproving. But enough did that the sound filled the hall, echoing off stone walls. Kale leaned in close. Breathe. She did. One breath, then another, finding her center. I know many of you have doubts, Aria said, surprised by how steady her voice was. I'm not from a powerful family. I have no prestigious bloodline. A month ago, I was nobody, just a girl from a dying pack that no one cared about. The hall went quiet. But I've seen what happens when the people in power forget about the ones who aren't. I've watched settlements burn because they weren't important enough to protect. I've buried people who died because the system failed them. Her voice hardened. I won't let that happen again. As warden, as advisor, as queen, I will fight for every borderland pack, every struggling settlement, every person this kingdom has forgotten. Not because it's politically convenient, because it's right. Silence. Then Brennan stood. Well said, future queen. Others rose to their feet. Not all of them, but enough. Aria allowed herself a small smile. She'd done it. Against every odd, despite every obstacle, she'd gone from invisible to indispensable. The girl no one chose had become the woman no one could ignore. The following weeks were a blur of activity. Aria threw herself into the reconstruction effort with an intensity that worried Elena and impressed everyone else. She visited every refugee camp, met with every displaced pack leader, listened to every grievance and suggestion and desperate plea for help. And slowly, impossibly, things began to change. The first rebuilt settlement was completed 6 weeks after her appointment. It was small, just 20 families, but it was defensible, well-supplied, and connected to a network of similar settlements through regular patrols and communication systems Aria had designed. She insisted on being there for the dedication ceremony. Marcus was among the families moving in. He'd recovered physically from his ordeal, though Aria could see the trauma in his eyes, the way he flinched at sudden sounds. "You did this," he said, looking at the new homes, the community hall, the fortified walls. "You actually did it." "We did it," Aria corrected. "You, me, the survivors who helped plan it. This belongs to all of us." Marcus studied her face. "You're different, harder, but also better, stronger." "I had to be." "I'm sorry," he said suddenly, "for how I treated you, for the pressure, the expectations, for making you feel worthless when you were—" He stopped, emotion choking his voice. "You were never worthless, Aria. I was just too blind to see it." It was the closest thing to an apology she'd ever gotten from him. It wasn't enough. It couldn't undo years of being dismissed and ignored, but it was something. "Thank you," she said. They stood together in silence, watching families move into homes that would keep them safe through the coming winter. "Will you visit?" Marcus asked. "When I can, but I have responsibilities in the capital now." "Of course. You're going to be queen." He said it like he still couldn't quite believe it. "My daughter. A queen." "Your daughter, a person who matters," Aria corrected. "The queen part is just a title." Marcus smiled slightly. "She's wise too." "When did you get so wise?" "When I stopped waiting for permission to matter." 3 months after Drake's arrest, they finally broke him. It wasn't torture. Kale had forbidden that despite Thorne's suggestions. It was patience, isolation, the slow, grinding realization that no one was coming to rescue him. The name he gave them was Lord Corvin, a noble from the Eastern Territories who'd been quietly consolidating power for years. "He wanted chaos," Drake said, his voice hollow from weeks in solitary confinement. "Wanted the Northern Territories weak and fractured so the East could expand. I was supposed to create the crisis. He was supposed to provide the solution." "Where is he now?" Kyle demanded. "I don't know. We communicated through intermediaries. I never met him directly." Drake laughed bitterly. "I thought I was so clever. Thought I was using him. But he was using me the whole time." Kyle sent word to the Eastern Territories immediately. A formal accusation backed by Drake's confession and the physical evidence of the stitched creatures. Lord Corvin denied everything, of course. Called it slander. Demanded an apology. The situation was headed toward war. Aria sat in on the council meetings where they debated responses, strategies, potential alliances. She listened more than she spoke, learning the patterns of power, the ways nations maneuvered around each other. But when Thorne suggested a preemptive strike against the Eastern Territories, she finally spoke up. "That's exactly what Corvin wants. He's been positioning himself as a victim of Northern aggression for months. If we attack first, we prove his narrative and lose any diplomatic leverage we have." "Then what do you suggest?" Thorne asked. "We let him get away with murdering thousands of our people?" "No. We make him irrelevant." Aria stood, moving to the map. "Corvin's power base depends on the Eastern Territories being united behind him, but they're not. There are at least 3 major factions, all competing for influence. If we can drive wedges between them, offer better trade deals to Corvin's rivals, expose his necromancy experiments to the religious factions who'd be horrified, we can isolate him without firing a shot." "Divide and conquer," Brennan said thoughtfully. "It could work. It will work. Because Corvin made the same mistake Drake did. He underestimated his opponents, thought we'd react with violence instead of strategy." Aria met Kale's eyes. "Let's prove him wrong." The plan took 4 months to implement. 4 months of careful diplomacy, strategic leaks, and economic maneuvering that Aria coordinated with a precision that surprised even her. When Lord Corvin was finally arrested by his own people, charged with illegal necromancy and treason against the Eastern Crown, It was almost anticlimactic. The threat was over. Not permanently. There would always be threats, but this one at least was done. The wedding was held on the first day of spring, exactly 6 months after Aria had stood in that gathering hall and told Kael he was wasting his time. She wore white silk embroidered with silver wolves, her hair loose except for the crown of winter flowers Elena had woven through it. She looked like a queen. She felt like herself. The ceremony was huge, a political necessity. But Aria barely noticed the crowds. Her focus was entirely on Kael, standing at the altar in formal robes, his expression soft in a way she'd never seen it before. They spoke the traditional vows, exchanged the traditional symbols. But when Kael kissed her, sealing the bond, there was nothing traditional about the feeling that surged through her. This was real. This mattered. This was hers. The celebration lasted 3 days. People came from every corner of the kingdom to witness the coronation of a queen who'd started as nobody. On the third night, exhausted from smiling and dancing and playing the role, Aria escaped to the balcony of their private quarters. Kael found her there bringing wine and blessed silence. "How are you holding up?" he asked. "I'm ready for everyone to leave so I can sleep for a week." 2 more days of official events, then they're gone. Aria groaned. Kael laughed, pulling her against his side. "You did well. Better than well. Half the nobles who came expecting to disapprove left charmed. Only half? The other half will come around, or they won't. Either way, you've proven yourself." He pressed a kiss to her temple. "I'm proud of you." "For what? Surviving?" "For changing everything. The borderlands are rebuilding. The council actually listens to new ideas now. The kingdom is stronger because you forced it to be." He turned her to face him. "You did that. You." Aria wanted to deflect, to downplay her role, but she was tired of making herself smaller. "We did it," she said instead. "Together." "Together," Kael agreed. They stood there, watching the stars come out over the capital, over the territories they were responsible for, over the kingdom that had tried to break them both. "What happens now?" Aria asked. "Now," Kael smiled. "Now we figure out how to be married while also running a kingdom. Should be interesting." That's one word for it. "Do you regret it? Any of it?" Aria thought about the girl she'd been, invisible, forgotten, convinced she was worthless. She thought about everything she'd endured to get here, the pain, the fear, the moments where she'd been absolutely certain she was going to die. "No," she said, "I don't regret any of it." "Good, because I'm not letting you go." "You couldn't if you tried." They went back inside eventually, back to the celebration and the responsibilities and the 100 little crises that came with ruling. But for that moment, on that balcony, they were just 2 people who'd found each other in the chaos and decided to hold on. Aria Vale had gone from being the girl no one chose to the queen everyone had to respect. She'd survived when survival seemed impossible. She'd proven herself when everyone said she'd fail. She'd changed the balance of power in a kingdom that thought power couldn't be changed, and she'd done it by refusing to be invisible anymore. Years later, when historians wrote about the Northern Territory's transformation, about the borderland reform, the defeat of Lord Corvin, the rise of diplomatic solutions over military force, they would point to Queen Aria as the catalyst. But she would tell a different story. She would say she was just a girl who got tired of being nobody, who took a chance when a king offered one, who refused to back down even when backing down would have been easier. She would say she was just lucky. But the truth, the one she carried in her heart, was simpler. She'd stopped waiting for permission to matter, and that had made all the difference. The first year of Aria's reign brought challenges no one had anticipated. A drought hit the borderlands in late summer, threatening the newly rebuilt settlements. The council wanted to redirect water from the central territories, which would have helped the borderlands but damaged the interior farms. Aria proposed something different. "We build a canal system," she said, unfurling maps across the council table. "Connect the northern rivers to the drought zones. It'll take time and resources, but it solves the problem permanently instead of just shifting it around." "That's impossible," Thorne said. "The engineering alone is complex but not impossible. I've consulted with builders from 3 different territories. They say it's feasible." Aria met his gaze steadily. "Unless you'd prefer we let people starve while we debate?" The canal project began 3 weeks later. Aria spent months traveling between construction sites, sleeping in workers' camps, getting her hands dirty alongside the laborers. Kale joined her when he could, though his duties kept him in the capital more often than not. "You don't have to do this," he said one night, finding her reviewing engineering plans by lamplight in their tent. "You're the queen. You could delegate." "I could," Aria agreed, "but then it wouldn't get done right. And these people, they need to see that I'm invested, that I'm not just giving orders from a comfortable palace. You're exhausted. I'm alive. There are people in mass graves who aren't." She looked up at him. "I can rest when the work is done." Kale pulled her to her feet and into his arms. "You're going to burn yourself out." "Maybe, but I'll burn bright doing it." The canal was completed in 18 months. When water first flowed through it, irrigating fields that had been dust for years, the celebration lasted a week. Aria stood with Marcus, watching children play in the irrigation channels. "Your mother would be proud," he said quietly. "She always said you had fire in you. I just couldn't see it." "She died trying to keep the pack alive," Aria said. "I wish she could have seen this, seen that it was possible to survive and thrive, not just endure." "She sees it," Marcus said. "Wherever she is, she sees it." Aria wanted to believe that, needed to believe it. That night, back in the capital, she and Kael stood on their private balcony overlooking the city. Lights twinkled below, homes, businesses, lives being lived in relative peace. "I have news," Kael said. Aria turned to him. "Good or bad?" "Depends on your perspective." He took her hand. "The healers confirmed it this morning. You're pregnant." The world seemed to stop. "I'm what?" "Pregnant. About 2 months along." Kael's expression was careful, watching her reaction. "I know we haven't discussed this. With everything happening, the timing isn't ideal." Aria kissed him, hard and desperate and full of emotions she couldn't name. When they broke apart, she was crying. "Hey," Kael said softly, wiping tears from her cheeks. "Talk to me." "I'm terrified," Aria admitted. "I don't know how to be a mother. I barely know how to be a queen. And bringing a child into this world, with all its dangers and complications." "I know. I'm terrified too." He rested his forehead against hers. "But we'll figure it out, same way we figured out everything else." "Together?" "Always together." The pregnancy was hard. Aria's body rebelled against the changes, and she spent the first trimester violently ill. The council suggested she step back from her duties. She refused. "Queens don't get to take breaks just because they're uncomfortable," she said, even as Elena held her hair back while she vomited into a basin. "Queens also don't have to prove they're superhuman," Elena countered. "You're allowed to rest." "I'll rest when I'm dead." "At this rate, that'll be sooner than you think." But Aria pushed through, working until her body literally couldn't anymore. She redesigned defensive structures while dealing with crippling nausea. She negotiated trade agreements while her back screamed in pain. She rebuilt a kingdom while building a life inside her. The baby was born on a winter morning, screaming loud enough to wake half the palace. A girl. Small, but fierce, with Kael's gray eyes and Aria's stubborn chin. They named her Lyra, after Aria's mother. Holding her daughter for the first time, Aria felt something shift inside her, a fierce protectiveness that made every other emotion pale in comparison. "I will burn the world down before I let anyone hurt you," she whispered. Lyra just yawned, unimpressed by the threat. Kael laughed, exhausted and delighted. "She's perfect. She's going to be trouble. With us as parents? Absolutely." He kissed Aria's forehead. "I can't wait." The kingdom that had once dismissed Aria now watched her daughter with fascination and hope. Lyra represented something new, a future where power came from strength of character rather than bloodline alone. On Lyra's first birthday, Aria stood before the council with a proposal that would change everything. "I want to establish a scholarship system," she said, "one that identifies talented young people from all territories, especially the borderlands, and trains them for leadership positions, not based on family connections or wealth, based on merit." The silence was deafening. Then Brennan spoke. "You want to democratize power. I want to stop wasting potential. How many brilliant strategists are out there, dying in poverty because they were born in the wrong place? How many leaders never get the chance to lead because they don't have the right last name? Aria's voice was fierce. We're hemorrhaging talent while mediocre nobles coast on their ancestors' accomplishments. That has to change. The traditional families will revolt, Thorne warned. Let them. I did. Aria smiled. And look how that turned out. The scholarship program was approved after months of debate. The first class of students arrived a year later, 20 young people from across the territories, chosen for their intelligence, determination, and potential. Aria taught them herself when she could. Strategy, negotiation, the art of seeing patterns where others saw only chaos. You're building your own power base, Kyle observed one evening, watching her review student essays. I'm building a better future, Aria corrected, one where talent matters more than tradition. Same thing. Maybe it was, but if so, Aria was fine with that. 5 years after her coronation, Queen Aria Vale stood on a hill overlooking the borderlands she'd rebuilt. Settlements dotted the landscape, connected by roads and canals and communication networks. Children played in streets that had been ash. Families lived in homes that had been ruins. It wasn't perfect. Nothing ever was. There were still conflicts, still struggles, still moments when Aria wondered if she was doing enough. But it was better. Measurably, undeniably better. Cale joined her, Lyra riding on his shoulders and chattering about the horses she'd seen. Mama, can I ride one? The girl asked. When you're bigger, Aria promised. But I'm big now. Bigger than now. Lyra pouted, but accepted the answer. Cale set her down to chase butterflies, then wrapped his arm around Aria's waist. Any regrets? He asked. Aria thought about it. Really thought about it. About the girl she'd been, standing invisible in a gathering hall. About everything she'd survived, everything she'd built, everything she'd become. Not one, she said. And she meant it. The girl no one chose had become the queen who chose herself. And in doing so, she'd changed everything.